Hi, Dr. Sharon Mijares. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a real pleasure. It's been a few years since I've seen you, so this is very nice.
Yes, you were one of my favorite professors in college. You helped me so much to get my degree. So I'm so grateful to you always. And just wanted to introduce you to the community so they can learn about who you are and everything you've done. And could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your path, and what you're doing right now, please?
Okay, well, that would be a very long answer. So I'll try to summarize. Part of it has been, I began with having to work through a lot of very difficult issues in early life, but that opened me up to better learning. It opened me up to a deeper caring, compassion, and a lot of intuition. And I have been guided. A friend of mine in Egypt says, your life, you have been guided since you were a very young child.
Wow.
And it is true in terms of how I've been able to process looking at religion. I was somewhat spiritual as a child, even though I had a lot of problems I had to work through because I always went to church. And by the time I got into adolescence,
Mhm.
I noticed that most of the fundamentalist churches were spending a lot of time arguing of who was better than the other. And, if they played cards or danced. And I had the insight at around age 13, 14 to realize life was more important than that. And so was spirituality. So I began to move on. And then because I'd seen nothing but fundamentalist traditions by the time I was 21, or 22, 23, I didn't really believe in any of them, except that I knew there was something in me that could not be explained away. So
Wow.
I had that inner sense, that inner touch, which, as my friend, by the way, Dr. Alia Rafia, a Sufi teacher, has a large group in Egypt, and we've collaborated on 3 books. So she has watched my life and from a deep perspective. I will also say that I was introduced at a transitional time to the writings of Carl Jung in the late 60s, maybe mid to late 60s. And that had a very profound experience on my life because I understood what he was saying about the collective unconscious and the archetypes. I would understand it more through the decades. And even now, I've been learning that Jung was far, far more than the Jungians portrayed him as because they were afraid of the fact that his science they wanted to create would be dismissed because Jung was actually a mystic and a prophet.
Oh, wow. That's so
So,
amazing.
yeah, right. And so there are certain books you can read about that, and you can ask me later if you're interested. But then I entered into a mystical Christian tradition,
Mhm.
which I still use a lot of those teachings, but yet at the same time, there was something that drove me away from it.
Mhm.
One was there was a sense of hierarchy and control, power and control in there. The other was the saying that one religion was better than another.
Mhm.
So as soon as that happened, I received a magazine that was on all the works of Hazrat Inayat Khan, a Sufi mystic that was here in the early 1900s.
Mhm.
And there are many, many books on his speeches and writings and everything. Anyway,
Yeah.
so all I did was I cut out his picture and I put it on the refrigerator because I was burned out by reading at that time. It was 1989. It's like I'm done with this. I need to rest. I need personal inner experience more than putting in more.
Mhm.
And I cut out his picture and put it on the refrigerator, saying, "Oh, what a striking face. He kind of reminds me of what my son might look like when he was older."
Mhm.
Well, 1 month later, here I am. My whole life has changed, and I'm in a school in Northern California. Maybe it's 2 months later. I'm in a school in Northern California by a bunch of synchronistic events that occurred. And it was Matthew Fox's school. And I'm going to be introduced to a teacher that I decide is the one I want to hang out with more. And he's a Sufi, and a member of a lineage of Hazrat Khan,
Mhm.
which was the universality of all religions, that at the core, each has the same message. And to just reverence, if you will, the differences within each one. He talked about each religion in a sense being like a musical note, and that together they formed the harmony, created a symphony.
Wow, I love that.
And then Neil Douglas Klotz, who I'd mentioned as the Sufi guide that I'd met in 1989,
Mhm.
is the one that has done all the translations of Jesus's, the most prominent of Jesus's words in the Lord's Prayer into Aramaic.
Oh, wow.
And around the world, people dance and sing that ritual. And it's also well known that the disciples were dancing
Hmm.
prayers at the time that Jesus was alive.
Dancing seems to be really
Afterwards,
connected to spirituality, like across a lot of cultures, right? Dancing.
yes, yes. In my late 20s, when I started waking up after reading Jung, one of the things I was introduced to a lot of Jung books was he was in the front of the best copy of the I Ching, the
Mm,
original translation for Westerners. And he was writing the preface for that, ancient 5,000-year-old Chinese book, The Secret of the Golden Flower.
mm.
Jung had a foreword in that.
Oh,
And so I could go on and on. And so I was being introduced to Jung at the same time that I was studying all these different ancient religious traditions.
I love that because Jung's work is so different from Freud's, right? And I always think about what psychology would be like had we gone the Jung way instead of the Freud way. But even now, like he just was like, he really believed in spirit. He believed in synchronicity. He wasn't just like, let's see everybody as ill and that kind of stuff. So could you,
He built himself a tower called the Bollinger Tower. And one will notice that Bollinger Press is the publication of most of his books now.
Mhm.
And he would go on long, long retreats
Mhm.
where he would paint and draw, do yoga, breathing, and mantra practices, and then allow himself, when they talk about automatic writing in Jungian therapy, they mean the real thing where you're channeling, letting stuff coming through you and you're writing it.
Mhm.
And so a lot of his stuff, even if you read the Red Book,
Mhm.
it's like a little odd in terms of him going in these inner experiences and being led by
Mhm.
various entities and beings,
Yes.
all taking him deeper to the point where, in one point, he says, I don't have to be asked if I believe in a God, I know.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
That's the mystic. That's the mystic.
That's what it means to know means to be a mystic. Could you clarify that?
No, to know means you are speaking from the authentic truth, and there's no questioning within you of what your experience has been.
Yes. And so he arrived at that and he had that realization.
Yes,
So all of his work is based on
right,
that.
right.
Exactly. Wow.
So I have discovered a writer, Peter Kingsley, who does a lot of the studies and writings on pre-Platonic Greek philosophers
Mhm.
that, we hear about the mystery schools and we hear about how they would go into these incubations. Well,
Mm.
that was to go into this period of silence, quiet, kind of beyond our average sense of meditation,
Mhm.
and one would be taken into a very, very deep state where they would be guided from within. The first story is the philosopher Parmenides, and most philosophy classes don't understand Parmenides and the depth of his poetry, where he's discussing going into one of these hibernating states, going into a very deep, profound state, and he's carried away by the daughters of Apollo and carried into the underworld where he meets with Queen Persephone, the queen of the underworld, and she extends her right hand to his and greets him and then begins to give him truths and understandings that will help to build a better world.
Oh,
That the laws and the rules that were coming in were coming from a deep understanding of integrity and how to live rather than given to us from an external source. So
mhm.
that's all pretty profound. And it's Peter Kingsley that writes a lot on that. So I've been reading him a lot the last, I'd say, year and a half.
Oh, that's
And it
wonderful.
was my
Oh,
Sufi friend, it was my Sufi friend, Neil Douglas Klaus, that introduced me to Peter Kingsley.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love how you read a lot and you write a lot. I don't know how you do so much. That's why I think you're such a good inspiration for all of us because you do so much. And I think that's just amazing because especially with all the energies changing, it hasn't affected you. You've been writing nonstop as long as
Well, I write more than I read. I generally do. Peter Kingsley really called to me, but I don't do a lot of reading in comparison to many people. I can't because I'm a professor. I'm working online. I've got all these papers I have to read and give comments on. So
yeah.
it's like I'm, phased out by a certain hour.
You know
But
enough. I think you know enough, Dr. Mijares.
right, right.
Yes. And okay, so you're a professor right now. You're also a depth psychologist and you're a writer, right? Those are the
Right.
main focus. And you're living in Mexico right now. How do
Yes.
you like that?
I'm really happy that I did this. I actually followed inner guidance. It came straight. You'd say, to be more accurate, it was more like channeled to me that I was to move to Cholula, and it was always supposed to be that I would move to Cholula. It's not very pretty here, and there's not a lot of nature, but I am like within walking distance of the largest pyramid in the world.
Oh, wow.
Giza is the tallest, but the Great Pyramid in Cholula is the largest. It's three different civilizations built pyramids on top of it. And then it was covered by earth, nature, and the Catholic Church came in and put a lovely little yellow church at the top. But then they discovered that there were all these civilizations underneath, and they began, so archaeologists have built tunnels. And so as a tourist, I came in unconsciously about 7 years ago, did the touristy thing, went through the tunnels, didn't pay a whole lot of attention, and then went for a cappuccino in the museum. And now here I am, 7, 8 years later, living here.
Wow.
Very different. We can have an experience and we don't realize the power that's in it at the moment
Mm-hmm.
that is going to be present in our lives later. And being here is opening me to very deep healing changes, very deep getting guidance, more guidance. I had 3 dreams right after I moved here that were very big guiding dreams for me and how I teach.
Mm-hmm.
First, the personal work. It's always important, the personal work within ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to hear you talk about that because a lot of healers, like, sometimes people think, "Oh, I've learned enough," but we are always all as healers need to do our shadow work and our to stay stable so we're not projecting or counter transference. Could you share
Right. There
that?
were in those 3 dreams, the first one was December 22nd, so it's right after the solstice. And the third one was January 5th, so they came really closely. And I knew they were different. You wake up with a sense that it's a very different kind of a dream. You've been given guidance. And what was really interesting was that in the first one, I'm in a school, I'm in some kind of a meeting where I'm going to be trained in 7 steps that I can be teaching others for the steps to truly enter into a new age.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm leaving, I'm told that I need to be weighed, like having your weight.
Mm-hmm.
In the dream, I think something about, well, I've been eating a lot of enchiladas. So within a very short time of waking up, I realized, oh my God, that was the collective unconscious. That was a reference to the ancient Egyptian myths of weighing your heart against a feather. There it is. Okay, the next dream is going to be, I won't go into the details of it, but it was going to be about the first step is needing to break to be able to be nonconformist,
Mm-hmm.
to realize that even our ideas of transformation are based on old paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the third dream comes, and in that dream, here comes my mother and all the issues I've never really dealt with. And then there's a little, because a lot of it's unconscious, you can have goodwill, but have you dealt with the unconscious part?
Absolutely.
So there's a boy sitting in my lap, and he's kind of a trickster type, a little bit mischievous. But anyway, he's looking down and he's looking around. And then in the dream, I'm both the observer and I have him in my lap. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking down too. And what are we looking for? The feather.
Wow.
we can't find the feather. So there's the confirmation that I had the intuition on the first dream right on, and that I needed to do the work of mother stuff.
And that's mother stuff. So the heart is
Right.
the heart, because I feel like the Divine Mother is so unconditionally loving, but human moms have done the best they could. And so we all have a mother wound, I would say, as a collective, right?
Right. But let's look at some of the stuff of like Kali Durga.
Hmm.
Kali Durga is both the fierce destroyer to waken you up,
Hmm.
and the loving mother.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, I'm looking at these old ideas, but how do we embrace them in terms of even some new understandings in our lives that are going to be impacting us?
Exactly. Like the feminine archetypes that you talk about, right? You were saying they're needed for our world right now. And I do think like, yeah, Durga, the story, as you know, she comes at the end of the world and she destroys the demon that nobody else could kind of kill. And she does it in a 9-day battle where she finally eats him, basically. That's how she finally
Right.
gets them, right? And so how would that symbology apply to modern life, women, men, since men also have the feminine archetype, right? But what do you feel?
I think, if we look at the deepest teachings in this age we're in, and as it's ending,
Hmm.
and we don't know how it's going to end, but as it's ending, it's definitely going through a transformational stage and needs to, and all the old teachings, Native Americans, ancient Vedic teachings, you name it, have also always talked about age and a change and transformation. But there's one myth that's been speaking out to me more and more, and it's even in the story of Jesus's crucifixion and pretty much ignored by the church.
Mm.
Jesus dies, he's crucified, and he spends 3 days in hell
Mhm,
before resurrection. Go
mhm,
back 5,000, 3,000 years before that, and you've got the Sumerian goddess Inanna's
mhm,
descent into the underworld. You've got, I mentioned Persephone earlier, Persephone into the underworld, the Greek philosopher having to do the descent, being taken on the chariot by the daughters of Apollo, who are goddesses in their own right, down to the underworld where the goddesses justice and truth are going to instruct him. So
mhm.
this whole underworld thing is like really significant. It takes us out of all of our conscious understanding to enable us to miss out on what's obscured in this world. And at the same time, I think it's real important. Sufis have a term about um, moving beyond the veils.
Mm.
And that's like saying all the ways that the world has a kind of a concrete thing around us. You call it veils or pretty concrete, but a way of how to remove all that, that we're aware of a much larger connection and at the same time needing to descend and deepen. And in that process, be instructed.
Yes, the underworld is different from hell. A lot of people misunderstand that, I think. Underworld is more like our subconscious mind. Hell is like a concept they made to kind of scare people, but the underworld is more like an inner journey, right?
An inner journey, but yet at the same time, if you look at shamanic traditions, there are three realms.
Hmm.
There's this realm, there's the underworld, and there's the above world.
Hmm.
And they go, depending on the need, in different directions. So we got our ideas of hell based on some from Zoroastrian traditions and then how those got reinterpreted.
Hmm.
And but we have to look at all the earlier religious understandings were very different.
Yes, because you've written a book about different religions and how to use them, like in therapy, for example. So you know a little bit about each religion. Would you
Right.
mind sharing a little bit about like all the things they all have in common? Because all the wars that are happening right now are kind of over these ethical misunderstandings. But a lot of religions just say be kind, be a good person, take care of the sick and the needy, right?
And to go a deeper into that's the outer stuff, and that's very important. It's like crucially important, but yet it's also about the recognition of the divine within. And
Mm-hmm.
that may take the underworld.
But that
Okay.
that's through the
And that, right, right. That's very important. And the recognition of the divine within doesn't happen from a conceptual thing of just thinking light. It's
Yes.
not where it's at. It's a very deep thing within. But let's say that we're also part of the consciousness of the earth, part of the consciousness of all of humanity. So it's an actual realm.
So it is a dimension, like you can actually travel it, and it's the underworld, and all kinds of things are there. But it's not
Right.
like people go there to be punished. It's more like a learning
No,
experience,
exactly.
right?
It's more a very profound one. Like I said,
Mhm.
Parmenides received from the two goddesses, Justice and Truth, they were each a goddess, the guidelines for how to live in this world. They
Exactly.
came from an inner rather than an outer set of laws.
Exactly. Can you explain that a little bit, like the inner set of laws versus outer? So what does that mean, like inner set of laws a little
Inner
bit?
set of laws are going to be more connected with the divine speaking in this sense we're speaking through.
Mhm.
Remember, they did the incubations, the going into the deep meditative state where they were carried away. And
Mhm.
in that being carried away, they were carried to a deeper knowing. And so that's like I said with Jung, I don't believe, I know.
Like he actually went through the journey. It's one thing to read about the underworld. It's another thing to like some of the creatures that Jung draws in his red book. I saw them in my journey. I was like, wow, that like huge giant fish. I was like, I saw that thing, and I was like, am I
Right, right,
psychotic? Am I not
right.
psychotic? But so could you explain that how sometimes we see these things and in traditional psychology, they think like, oh, that could be psychosis, but it's not, it's visions, right?
No, right, exactly. And Jung, that's why Jung allowed himself to go in those deepening places. You know, he's about the most profound in modern history
Mhm.
because it's been a long while since we've really had these very deep, profound understandings. Everything since Plato forward, and that's what Peter Kingsley points out, has been more conceptual,
Mhm.
more adjusted by the rational reasoning mind. And so that has blocked our past from going into this deeper sense of experiential knowing. And all the mystics say, it's said in different languaging, but because each religion basically was birthed in a different land, in
Mhm.
a different experiences, and that prophet came forward embodying all that. And so although the same truth emerges, manifests, there is a unique quality to it according to the land and the place, and so um it's real important. I kind of lost my original trail purpose on that. What was my original purpose in saying that?
I think we're like what was it? Yeah, our conversation is kind of flowing. So I've been kind of going with you in it.
That's me.
We're in an experience. I love that. Every time I talk to you, it's like an experience for me. So, yeah, I think oh yeah, the experiential versus the intellectual spirituality.
That's right. And being stuck by the whole conceptual thing. Most of us don't realize, we don't have the training to realize that a lot of our things are all concepts.
Mm-hmm.
They're all mental frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been reasoned and rationalized out, and they help us to live and live with one another, but they also are like cages that keep us from knowing the deeper truths.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's real important to recognize that, not that they don't have their goods, and we live in this world and we live with one another, so there are certain benefits to this, but when it comes to the deeper path, we have to kind of let go of all that and be guided.
Yes, that's beautiful. And so people that are watching this, like what would be the way you suggest for them to kind of do that, to go less from the concepts of spirituality and all the stuff that's on YouTube that's kind of, overwhelming everybody, so much information right now, right? Versus the actual experiential and
Right. First, people have to do a lot of self-examination to know what do they really believe.
Mhm,
Most people have no idea what they really believe.
mhm,
They like something because it's nice or what have you, but then question, why is that?
mhm,
Okay, going deeper with that, but deeper in a sense of holding a space to be guided from within.
mhm. Like waiting for action instead of just being
That's right.
like,
It is present. The knowing is, well, we could go to Carl Rogers. He used to say that in psychotherapy, everybody has the answers within. I don't think that a lot of people have that readily available to them, and that's why therapy helps. And some may never get it, at least in this lifetime. But there is that deepening. But first, we want to look at the integrity of our own lives and how we're handling our own lives and our issues. so that we develop discernment. It's not with a sense of looking for something to feel guilty about or shame or any of those church taught kind of stuff. It's about with a sense of openness to ever deepening. And in the mystical traditions, it's to know the divine within.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because that would really free humanity. If they all knew divine within, the whole earth would change, right? Because right now,
Right,
all humans are walking around just seeing themselves as little humans and they don't know what to do. But if they're like, oh my God, God is within me, they would have worth, they would have self-love, they would all be able to help
right.
each other more. Yeah.
Right. And most of the wars, like you had mentioned, the wars that are going on, they all have religious divisions, whether it's talked about or not.
Mhm.
You know,
Absolutely. Like in
and
Middle East right now and everywhere.
right, it's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Mhm.
The big
Three brothers
market.
are fighting or something. It's like,
Right, right. Now we see more Christians and Jews against Muslims and vice versa. But if we go back to the Crusades, it was Christians against Jews and Muslims.
oh, okay. So they're kind of like teaming up against each other.
But a different kind of teaming now.
Yeah.
And so these changes that take place, but none of that is about awakening to the divine within. That's all about patriarchal power and control.
Yes. And could you clarify that? Because I know when you say patriarchal, you don't mean like men. You mean like the old traditional
Right.
masculine dominance, the
It's been a paradigm that came about. I believe that some of it came about as we moved into the patriarchal organization began as we moved into agriculture and all of that. We had had agriculture all along, but as it became more commercialized, you begin to have the haves and the have-nots. That's one of the things I think is real significant.
Mhm.
And then you've got the civilizations where people are not nomadic; they're basically forming. Yes, we'd had small civilizations all along. It looks like from archaeological diggings or whatever, but this began to be bigger, more sedentary.
Mhm.
And that began to bring this idea of who's in control, who's writing the laws, what are the laws for living together in larger groups, blah,
Mhm.
blah, blah. These are God-given.
Mhm.
And so all of this began to be very structured. And then as it became more structured and according to the feminist view, uh, the male wanted to know who was the baby.
Oh, who's
And
the
so control right, patriarchy is also about paternity
mm.
and the patriarchal lineage in the family. Now there are also maternal lineages.
Mm-hmm.
And but in terms of rules and dominant, even in a modern maternal lineage, for instance, Judaism is maternal lineage in the family,
Yeah.
but it's also very male dominated.
Mm-hmm.
So there you do get patriarchy in the masculine version coming through there. Now, men have been controlled by patriarchy as well. But the reality is that the influence has been deep for both males and females. And again, this inner work that's needed of discernment to say what's affecting this within me. How
Mm-hmm.
do I release it at this moment and be open to something deeper coming to myself?
I like that question. What's affecting this within me, and how do I open to something deeper? So asking that in conversations with people when we notice things come up or something like that, you're saying. Like,
Asking it of ourselves, that's where it begins.
yes. Like during the conversation, like mentally kind of being aware of that question. Like,
Yes, men need to be aware of how they've been indoctrinated by all this and be willing to really create changes. It's very hard. If you're in a group of even very progressive people, and there's a couple of males in the group, you will find that they start to dominate conversations.
yeah.
Almost always, almost always. And so they need to recognize that and they need to give room for the woman to speak out. So there is the whole idea of the feminine and the masculine in terms of archetypal forces, but it's a pattern that's been set into culture that truly needs to change, and that pattern evidences itself in men and women.
It's such an important point, this one, because right now men and women are having a difficult time connecting. I mean, I'm seeing it in the modern, like it's just like a war between men and women, which we could say it's always been there, but right now in the modern world, it's even worse. And I know that they fit so well, yin and yang together, right? But when there's like the
Right.
dark and the dark kind of fighting each other, like the dark masculine and dark feminine, the evil parts of them, I don't mean the shadows, but you know what I mean? So
Right.
how do we kind of come back into harmony, like respecting each
Well,
other?
first, I think we need to name what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Patriarchal forces right now, as we see in even the US government and including in strong governments around the world, they're more based on male dominance
Mm-hmm.
and keeping things in place as they've been.
Mm-hmm.
That's the bottom line. And then feminists are only contributing to that if they make men the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And they think they're the latest savior, the latest archetypal savior. That's not the answer either, because that's just more of the same. I think what I write this in my last book, The Power of the Feminine, that it's so important that we work together, all groups, all religions, all races, all genders, because what we're facing is bigger than any one segment of the human population. We need to truly come together and work together. And
Exactly.
what it's going to take to bring us to that is hard to see. We can only hope
Mm-hmm.
that something is going to manifest out of all that we're facing right now. Now, I believe that we need to tune into light and
Mm-hmm.
also hold the darkness. And the Taoists were very wise in that symbol for the I Ching symbol with the little tadpole looking thing in black with the white speck in it, and the white tadpole in the other direction with the black speck into it. And it's not necessarily male and female. It's more about yang is more about forward directed action. Yin is about more receptivity.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we see some of that culturally in gender,
Mm-hmm.
and but we also see that both are active. But if we understand the yin and yang, not necessarily as gender, but as forces that are meant to be held in that circle, in that balance, and we bring them to a recognition of harmony within that circle,
Mm-hmm.
that's what the Taoist image is headed for or means.
Yes, that makes
Thing. How can we be with both these opposites? How can we be with both these opposites in harmony and have a center within?
exactly, like accepting each other as we are, like women being honored for their traits and men being honored for their traits, and also respecting each other's yin and yang. Because doesn't Carl Jung talk about how we fall in love with each other's like anima and animus when we first meet someone?
We project the inner masculine on the male. If we're a female, and we project the inner feminine, or the male projects the inner female
Mhm.
feminine on the
Yes. Oh no, I think
down
it's
as part of this patriarchal change as well.
Sorry, the last 30 seconds, I couldn't hear you, Dr. Mahar. Could you just repeat the last 30 seconds what you said?
Oh boy.
Oh, don't worry about it. It just was like a
Well,
little
well, I was saying that yes, according to those early ideas of anima, the feminine in the male, and animus, the masculine in the female, which both we have masculine and feminine now. It's really well understand, and both genders have both of those. But generally, traditionally, the man would project the feminine archetype on the woman, and dependent upon the development of the feminine within himself would affect that relationship. The same way with the man, with a woman projecting the animus on the male, and according to the development of that archetype within themselves, that would affect the relationship.
Yes, that makes sense. I feel like for me, like as I'm healing my inner masculine and feminine, my relationship with men and women have completely changed, because it's like as
Mhm.
I understood my inner energies, I can understand them in others. And as I accept them in myself, I can accept them in others. And so,
Right.
yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Let's see. So, so your sense and your vision for the future is like what you said, like hoping that we all come together and we all unite across the different genders and the religions.
I will say, in having studied this from words of the Dalai Lama
Mhm.
to Native Americans, Hopi, and other traditions. What was I just reading the other day? I downloaded this
Mhm.
Hopi prophecy. When the earth is dying, there shall arise a new tribe of all colors and all creeds. This tribe should be called the warriors of the rainbow, and it will put its faith in actions, not words.
Exactly. I
And
get chills when you read that. It feels so good.
yeah, how do we reach that point? You know, that's not just a given. It's something that has to come into being, and a lot of that is impacted by how we live. Let's see. I wanted to read also the one from the Hopi,
Mhm.
Sioux. There will come a time when the earth is sick and the animals and plants begin to die. Then the Indians will regain their spirit and gather people of all nations, colors, and beliefs to join together in the fight to save the earth, the Rainbow Warriors. So, see, that's another version of the same thing. But
Yeah.
the idea is that the earth is in trouble
Mhm.
and that something is going to come forward. I truly believe the indigenous are, and increasing numbers of people are recognizing that it is the indigenous because they have kept this connection with heaven and earth. They have kept this connection of understanding the underworld,
Yes.
this plane and the planes above, and how to live in harmony with nature. They haven't separated it into heaven above and hell as negative, and this is just a trial place that we don't give much attention to.
Mhm. Exactly. Like they see nature as sacred. Native
Right,
Americans, right? They see a deer, they respect it. They see a buffalo, they see it as sacred. They don't just kill an animal. They're praying for the animals. And so,
right,
you're right. They do already have the blueprint. So it's kind of like the more we go back to the indigenous ways, that could be a way to really help humanity living in those communities and villages, those images of whether you call it the new kingdom or the new earth or the Hopi prophecy. There's all these visionaries that have said there is going to be a better world coming, right? And we're going to create
right.
those,
But
not
we need to bring it into being through how we live our lives.
exactly. Exactly. It's not going to just appear one day like magic.
No, I get amused at particularly the Middle Eastern traditions that talk about an afterlife of paradise that has beautiful streams and rivers and valleys and mountains. Well, what about this one right before us?
Exactly. The earth is so beautiful. The earth is so
Yeah,
beautiful. All the mountains, all the rivers, and it's like you said, like the old evil energy is kind of taken over and is controlling all these homeless people. We have enough land for everybody to have a home, for
yes,
everybody to have food,
right.
for everybody to
But
have.
it's the types of rules and regulations we have created that, you know, like I was telling, I teach a class in cultural and social justice for future therapists at National University. And we were discussing just Tuesday night about the fact that how our system is, if somebody gets down in their luck and they can't pay their rent and they get evacuated, and let's say they have a whole family, it is really hard to get that first last month's rent and deposit, plus pass a rental credit check to get back up into a healthy life where you have more control. It's a real hard thing right now. Many of the ways that we have created our responses to dealing with things have those that suffer stuck in places that are very difficult.
Exactly. So many people during the last 3 years went through this, and so many people had to move out of their different states and do everything. And we don't have compassion in our laws. I say, like, our laws are just very rigid, that kind of like a cold energy versus,
Right.
oh, this mom lost her home. We got to help her, give her like this. But then we're spending billions of dollars on weapons and wars, but we don't have money to give. So it's just obviously there's evil in
Right.
charge of the world right now. It's pretty obvious,
Right.
right?
So then we go back to those early journeys of incubation and being taken to the goddesses of justice and truth to be guided in the underworld
Mm-hmm.
on how to bring forth the laws that truly meet what is needed. To
Mm-hmm.
know that deep within ourselves, you know, we are guided, it comes through to know what is the right response. But you know, as we can see, the powers that control right now, the old patriarchal ones, they're not willing to give up. They're fighting like crazy. They're fighting against women. They're fighting against different classes,
Mm-hmm.
races, you know, you name it. And that's the whole old paradigm. So we have to be able to hold that image. We can't turn away from it and say, oh, well, I'll just focus on light and create more light. It's not going to work. We can't sit there and turn our back on the fact that we are connected with all of humanity and all of life. If you think of the earth as a living being, and then you think in our body we have different organs, we are, and so we look at different human beings in different nations and religions. They're all part of that human body.
Exactly.
One cannot exist without the other. So we can't turn away from what's happening right now. We have to be able to hold it. And yet at the same time, I think of like being beyond those veils to know of this inner reality that exists. And I can hold both at the same time.
I love that. And you do certain spiritual practices to help you stay in that mental
Right.
state, right?
Right. Every day.
And that's really important for people. I know because you've written a book about breath work. I remember you told me about years ago.
Mhm.
And so those practices kind of to keep us in that even keel, not numbing ourselves, being present, but
Right. Or not using a kind of a spiritual state that just goes away. You know, that's not it either. I have a practice that I do where first, I do a particular invocation and I focus a bit on what it means. And then, if we just do invocations that have words, they get mechanical. I have to focus on really what does it mean. And then I do some breathing practices. In fact, I have them on my website.
oh,
There's
wonderful.
some for the elements, air, earth, fire, and water, and how to balance them. And so I do those because that's very universal. And then I do some slower yogic-like breathing practices, breathing into the count of 10 or 12, holding for the count of 10 or 12. Beginners start with 4, and then a slow exhale, 16, or as long as I can hold it.
Mhm.
And so I do that a few times. Then I start in with my mantras.
And do you
And
write them yourself, or they're ones you found, or are they particular ones
they're
you?
ones that I know, and they're actually out of Sufism. There's one that I've been have come up with my own format that takes a Sufi mantra, which are the first lines of in the Quran.
Oh,
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the beginning, there was mercy, unconditional love, kindness,
yes.
and compassion. That was the first manifestation of the universe that it came into being. It was this unconditional love and kindness and compassion. And then every single verse, chapter of the Quran begins with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim as a reminder. So Rahman and Rahim are also related to the word for womb,
Mm.
same root.
Oh, you're
For
right. Yes, Rahem and Rahim. Yes. Wow.
Yeah. So I do this Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, and how I am coming up with a way that I do my prayers, and yet at the same time I'm doing Tonglen, the Buddhist practice,
Oh, I
which
don't
you begin with being aware of your own suffering, your own issues, and what have you, and then you go to the second level, which is how it's played out in others that you know of, and
know.
then for the whole world is the third level. So what I've been doing is I do practices for myself, my family,
Mhm.
with the Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim. So
Mhm.
I'm aware of that as I'm doing, resonating the mantra in me. And then the second level rounds, you might say, depending, it's a busy day, I'd only do 33 each. If it's an average day, I would do 101 each.
Mhm.
And then the second one is for what's happening in Gaza.
Mhm.
And then the third takes some memory that are remembering that also what's happening in Ukraine and many other parts around the planet and the planet itself,
So
our
you can
environment.
send them that kind of those vibrations.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm holding that within this mantra of unconditional love and compassion.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Okay, so then that's the way I do my morning prayers. It's
And
not, and then I do one that's specifically a mantra for me. Then I'm up and ready to start the day.
and then kind of what happens, then you feel prepared because you've already mentally prepared and you know God, you've activated all those things within you.
I've set the stage with my beginning energies for the day.
Yes. So
And
very,
that's
very
the way of saying it.
I love that. I love that. And so, what do you feel like is the role of the individuals in bringing world peace, would you say? Like, what could we all individually do? Is it like about finding peace from within and then kind of loving everybody we meet? Or what would be like some things we could do individually, you
Well,
feel?
I think we also need to face truth. We can't have discernment if
Hmm
we don't look at where there are problems.
hmm hmm
So we can't just love everyone we meet. There's some people we need to have a boundary with.
Yes, yes. Yeah, like
Okay.
dangerous, yes. Like
So the
psychopaths.
more, but that doesn't mean that we have revenge or hatred or anything toward them. We just recognize, okay, I keep a boundary here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not someone that I'm going to fully engage with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We
Yes.
give where giving is good and for instance, like I was telling somebody yesterday, as they handed money out the car window to a boy that looked about 11 or 12
Mm-hmm.
on the street, and it's like you realize that he might use that for drugs. You're not really doing him a favor. It's a difficult position, I know, but see, that's where we have to have discernment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and discernment is kind of like our inner guidance. So like, is this person somebody I should help? Is this somebody I shouldn't talk to? And as our intuition gets stronger, then we can rely on it. I say like 100%. And the neuroscience and psychic development, would you mind, do you feel like sharing anything on that about how psychic abilities are real and neuroscience can prove it, that kind of stuff?
Well, neuroscience as it stands right now isn't trying to do that because it's trying to say that all of our neurology, our nervous system and everything are all systems related to the brain. The brain is just a piece of flesh, matter in our heads that is a transmitter and processes and whatever. Whereas true neuroscience, the
Mhm.
authentic spiritual neuroscience, is to recognize that the brain is receptor of all that's coming in. Again, when I mentioned about the other dimensions and the veils that keep us separate from them, and particularly the deep spiritual knowing, as the Hindus say, I am that, going to that deeper sense of knowing is, we can't do that if we don't go to a spiritual neuroscience that recognizes the nervous system and the brain is receiving,
Yeah.
and can be aware of how to both protect ourselves with a certain boundary. It's needed. We
Mhm.
can't be bombarded by everything in different dimensions or
Mhm.
whatever, but that at the same time we are open to being guided from a sense of light, and not just an up thing, a total surrounding us and
Mhm.
within our bodies. To me, that's the best of neuroscience, and to be guided. Channeling comes through our nervous system, comes in through the chakras, comes in through different ways where we channel information and we're guided.
Mhm.
Without a healthy nervous system,
Mhm.
we don't know what we're channeling. We don't know who we're channeling. We don't, whatever. So again, there's this training that's needed. Our practices are very important, our spiritual practices, because the idea is that they are having inner influences. That mantra, that breathing practice has been done for a long time.
Mhm.
And as we resonate within our nervous systems, we're opening to those fields of consciousness that have practiced this particular spiritual energy over a long period of time. So that's more how I view
Mhm.
life from a neuroscience perspective, spiritual neuroscience. And to prepare ourselves, I think, to become more open toward being guided, and that means being more aware. We can't be guided if we're not using good discernment. It's
Absolutely.
also dangerous in the inner realms. We don't know. You wouldn't trust your next door neighbor to tell you how to live your life, maybe, or anybody.
Mhm.
So if you're just thinking I'm being guided from within, and you
Exactly.
haven't developed the discernment, you don't know who's guiding you. You
Exactly.
know, it may be worse than what you can see with your own living eyes from your next door neighbor or something like that.
Exactly. I love that. I love that you said that, because a lot of spiritual people think like they're being guided by these different things, but then I don't see it show up in them. And I'm like, if that was really a good being, you wouldn't be this doing
That's
all
right.
these things. I can see
Right.
the after effects, right? So
Right.
yeah, like that ability to discern and feel the energies. I think that would, is there like good books you would recommend on that, or any way of building that discernment?
Well, I think, I've been going back to collecting some of the old theosophical books.
Oh yeah.
Rudolf Steiner,
Mhm.
Ledbetter, Alice Bailey. I'm in a group of consciousness. You've probably heard of the Science of Consciousness group, the network, because it's been associated with CIHS,
Yeah.
where you graduated.
Yeah.
And, they have a lot of there's a few people here and there. Some are, looking into science to prove consciousness exists. And then there's others that are looking more into the occult and
Mm,
the ancient occult teachings, not just the Greek and Egyptian, but also as they were translated through those early theosophists in the early 1900s, late
exactly.
1800s, early 1900s. So I've gone back to reading some of those when I have time. And I have a Rudolf Steiner a book I bought because in it he discusses a lot about spiritual evolution,
Okay. And how we can see signs of people like,
how it's
yeah.
moving. So I got that book on consciousness when I was in the States,
Hmm.
and I haven't read it yet, haven't even opened it, but it's there. I may take it with me on my trip. I'm going on a trip in about a week and a half to California, so I
Oh,
may take it with me as the book to read. But Alice Bailey, she had a lot of really interesting things to say.
okay.
Rupert Sheldrake, I'm not Rupert Sheldrake, that's a whole nother paradigm that's now,
Mhm.
but Rudolf Steiner,
Beautiful, yes.
Alice Bailey, Ledbetter, I forget who else I want to mention, but from that era, that's like really significant stuff. So Ledbetter wrote a lot on the astral realms and being conscious that those are different inner dimensions, using language we use now, different inner dimensions, and there are many different planes within them. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, how do you protect yourself and know how to recognize what's not good, what are just keeping us in a sane place, somebody out there that wants to give information but hasn't done any deep work themselves and they're just attached to doing something here. Really learning that kind of stuff, and again with discernment, with inner discernment, by just how do we feel, what do we sense might be truer than something else,
Mm-hmm.
and feeling the shifts in the breathing as we examine different paradigms. Can we
Mm-hmm.
feel the shifts in our hearts, in the breathing? That's something that I learned actually from my Sufi guide years ago. He talked about that. Hold something in your heart and notice the opposites and how the breath changes. Those are subtle ways of recognizing too. So this discernment thing is like vitally important. And then and one of the things, from a psychological level is we waste time by feeling guilty and shame.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just be aware, oh, I need to shift, I need to change that. Understand why. Okay, let it go. Be grateful you had the insight.
Mm-hmm.
A
Okay.
waste of time to get stuck on self-blame. It just doesn't go anywhere.
And it lowers our like mindset, right? Like the guilt and the shame, it kind of stays
Goes
in the
nowhere.
body, and then we just want to have a chronic depression, and people don't know why.
Right,
It's all the repressed sort of
right,
uncomfortable emotions. And women suppress some things, and men suppress some things. They all have some things in common, right?
right,
But it seems to be men and women suppress their anger a lot, I've noticed, and men tend to suppress their sadness a lot, it seems like, right? But
right, right.
to
They've
express
got a lot of hidden depression and women have a lot of hidden anger. So it gets projected out.
exactly.
Shadow stuff. And so again, that's that inner work. Now that dream I had about the feather and my mother, the third one telling me real directly on the mother stuff that was so deep. And it's like, okay, that's kind of complicated because I haven't felt anything
Mm-hmm.
toward her.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, how can I work on it when I have no feelings or caring?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty bad. I recognize that it's very sad. And yet at the same time, how do I get to it? So I asked my next door neighbor here, I said, hey, Polo, I said, I am looking for a homeopathist. I want one that is scientific and an artist. I don't want traditional commercialized homeopathy. Oh my God, I met with the guy and he's pretty incredible.
Oh, I love that. Homeopathy is really good way at getting at emotional
It's
stuff.
not right. And I've noticed I've only been taking this was just this week that I met him.
Mhm.
And I've been taking the homeopathic
Mhm.
remedy. Oh my God, this guy had a gigantic office with like walls of all the medicines.
Yes, yes.
This was no lightweight homeopathist. And it was like, wow, I found a gem. And thank you, God, for bringing me, God and Goddess, for bringing me to this. And so, but I've noticed with just 3 days of taking it, my dreams are,
Mm,
I'm more aware of dreaming than I have been,
mm,
more aware. So that means the unconscious
mm,
is the veils. are thinner.
That's very interesting because I know you do a lot of dream work since you are a depth psychologist. Like, so how can people kind of understand their dreams better, or maybe like have these sort of spiritual dreams? Is there certain things before bed or certain thought processes or anything like that that would be good for dream work that you would recommend? Or
Well, I recommend first reading Man and His Symbols, a book in 1962, edited book with Jung and other Jungians. And
Mhm.
it gives a lot of images and gives a lot of the archetypes. It's a real good beginning. And then just you can look up, archetypal guidance on the shadow, archetypal guidance on the feminine. So you begin to recognize how these images of the collective unconscious show up in our dreams. Now, there was, when I was in Matthew Fox's school, which was a 9-month program
Mhm.
in 1989-90, and then in 1991, I helped in the group Dreamwork class.
Mhm.
And that Jeremy Taylor's no longer living, but he was an expert in teaching group dream work. And there's a whole process where one can learn the steps, and you don't need to be trained as a Jungian. And the
Mhm.
group follows a certain process, and they begin to learn how to become more aware of the meaning in dreams.
Oh, I love that. I love that. But I feel like dreams are like gems. Every time I have some kind of a
Oh my
dream,
gosh, yeah.
wow, like that would have taken me 10 years to figure that out or something like that, you know? I'm just like so
Mhm,
grateful for it.
mhm,
And I love the concept of the feather because I do think like our heart gets heavy, right? Like when we hold on
mhm.
to, like for me, when I hold on to resentment or I'm angry at somebody, I'm like, ah, like my chest hurts. There's like a knot in it. And I remember one time God told me, like a doctor basically almost killed me. They cracked my head. And God told me, like, don't sue this doctor because it's going to mess with your heart. We've been trying to purify your heart. But if you sue them, that'll bring this revenge. And he was like, just let it go. None of it is worth
There
it.
you go.
And
Yeah, and that's that mot and from the Egyptian goddess with the
Mhm.
feather. She gives them the feather, and that you can find many ancient images of the scales and the feather against a human heart.
Yes, and her
And
little
so,
her feather was
right, her little feather on the top. That's
ostrich
right.
feather, the ostrich
Right,
feather. Apparently, they're very ancient creatures, and I've seen them. They're so beautiful. And
right, right.
this was there too, right? Like Anubis is kind of the guardian in the underworld or something like that.
Yes, yes, there was a whole lot of them there. In fact, there's a place I found at a mall near here, 20 minutes away or so, and they're really great. They take images and put them on a canvas. And
Uh,
so I have one of Inanna's descent into the underworld that I found being put on a canvas, and the other is of the weighing of the heart.
oh, I love that. And I love
And they will be over my bed with a very spiritual picture that I have in the center of a vision I had at the Temple of the Moon in Cusco.
oh, is that with the green star that you had? I think
Yeah, with and the women shining with through the women.
yeah.
That vision was this group of women, and the lights actually, I couldn't portray it exactly in Photoshop, but it was like rays of light coming through them, and they're standing in a group, and the woman in the circle, the understanding was she was only possible because of them. So it wasn't a patriarchal image of a woman being dominant. It
Mhm.
was that yes, she was in the center, but they were all together. And so what I did was I had some belly dancer friends,
Mm.
and they stood out on a lawn in a circle
Uh-huh.
with Maria holding a pose in the center. And then with Photoshop, I don't know how to do this now because it's changed so much, removed all the outside and then put a light behind it, and then use the kind of luminosity or whatever they call it in Photoshop to have it shining through, and then took a picture I'd taken at the temple of the at the what is it Temple of the Moon in above Cusco, and put them all together.
I love that. Yeah, I love that artwork. It's good because if you
Yeah.
could send me a picture of
It's
it.
I love it too. So I left it when I moved from New Mexico because I could only take so much in my car, but I also knew that I had the photographs. And so I replicated it when I got here at this better than before at this quality store. And then I took yesterday the Inanna's Descent and the weighing of the heart against a feather there to be put on the side of each so that my bedroom is a reminder of this work.
I love that. And like that's so important, right? To have images around us, the
Oh my
symbol.
God, yeah, it's reminders of
Like
Yeah.
reminds me, like I'm like, oh, I look at the cup, I might be in a thought or something, I see something, I'm like, oh, okay, it brings me back, every time kind of. And I love the story of Inanna. I just have to ask you about it because you're bringing it up. And I think it's interesting because it's something that happens. I forget, like it's like her husband does something and then she ends up in the underworld, and then she has to pass
Well, actually,
7
there's kind of a negative part that I just saw in an encyclopedia the other day. She had actually been responsible for the death of Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld's husband.
Okay, so
So,
Inanna killed her sister's husband. Oh,
right. So there's a little bit of a story there, and I hadn't known that particular part. So, but it's like this whole journey. It's just more to look at.
yes.
But Inanna, when she goes to the underworld, she knows that she's going to her death.
Oh, like
Okay.
she
She
knows
goes
her.
to her sister, Queen
Mhm.
Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld. She goes knowing that as she gives up all of those things, and each one is a metaphor, like the crown, that's like the all of our concepts and ideas,
Mm,
the her necklace or whatever, that's like, our speech, what we say, her earrings, our hearing. She gives up all of this stuff and enters the underworld totally naked. Now
mm.
people point out, I have two Sumerian scholar friends, and we recently did last year, we did an article. And the link to that is on my website in
I'll definitely post those in the bio so people can find.
the psychospiritual.org. It's in the updates.
Okay.
And it's got some updates on some recent articles, and the links will take them directly to that Inanna story that we did. I did this. It was Inanna in 3 plays, an act in 3 plays on this end of the underworld, each of us taking a different perspective. And of course, as a more Jungian and not a Sumerian scholar, I took a more modern perspective. So Inanna goes to her death in the underworld, and she hangs on a hook, and she's Inkil Rex sends her servant Ninchubar. It had been prearranged if she didn't return in 3 days, that she was to go to Inkil and see if he could rescue her, if any of the gods and goddesses would rescue her. And so there was a hope of being brought back to life in some way. And so then she is brought back to life, and she comes up through all the 7 gates. And when she gets up there, she finds that her servant Ninchubar has been mourning her, and her son is covered with ashes and has been mourning her, but that her husband Dumuzi, the shepherd, is sitting on the throne partying. And so he ends up being the one that takes her place in the underworld. And but the story, as I looked at that in my articles, my portion of the article, it's about respect. Women demanding respect.
Yeah.
And that's translated from this day, but that's the way metaphors are.
Yeah, so it's so
It can be
important to
flexible for different ages.
yeah, it's so
And
important to
that,
respect the feminine.
go on. I'm sorry.
It's so important to respect the feminine, like the divine mother. I feel like the respect and honor I have for her, she just does so much for me. And I think like that's such an important thing to respect the feminine because that's when she flowers, right? Because then she can show us everything versus like the father God, mother God being like this, but actually seeing it.
It's just our divine right
Mm-hmm.
be respected. But then we also have the need to do what is needed to be respected at the same time. How do we and that starts with ourselves. As we know ourselves, the self-respect we give. So then you go to that inner journey, that descent, to that place for anything that's blocking us from that self-respect is vitally important as well. And an interesting thing is the story of Inanna's descent was 5,000 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
3,000 years before Jesus's crucifixion, descent into the underworld, and resurrection. Both are 3 days. That's a very interesting thing.
Why do you think that is the
I
three?
don't know.
Very interesting that
And very often, funerals, and it's been a pattern in the past. It's not necessarily followed as much anymore, but in funerals in the Christian tradition have been especially within 3 days.
Oh, there must be something that happens to the soul in those 3 days that must be very significant or something like that.
Right, right. It is very interesting, and I don't know if we have the answer, and it differs with different cultures.
Yes.
Differs a whole lot. I think Christians, it may be because Christ was dead for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeshua,
Yes.
dead for 3 days and then resurrected. And yet Jews and Muslims, they bury right away.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
Right. So that's not followed there.
Mhm.
Tibetan Buddhists, it's some time
Before they
before,
bury someone.
right, because of a whole spiritual process that's taken place.
And
So it does differ culture to culture.
do you feel like was it also in Egypt like that? Because they had all the mummification processes. Would they like wait to bury
I
someone?
don't know what the time was for that, and that's an interesting question. But yeah, they went through a whole lot of processes, one taking the heart out, I guess, away.
And they would throw out the brain. I thought that was the funniest thing, how they put the heart and all the other organs in little jars, but the brain, they would just suck it out through the nose and throw it away. Like they're like, this is nothing, which I thought was really interesting how much we pay
Yeah,
attention to the
right,
now.
right.
So,
Those are, that's really the beginning of Western civilization.
the Egyptian stuff.
Yeah, and it's very much in harmony with all of the Jungian stuff and the
Mm.
collective unconscious, even though those themes show up in other places. It's really the whole Egyptian, Greek kind of thing that's the beginning of Western civilization.
Yes, and Osiris went to the underworld, right? Isis went to the underworld. So there was that journey with them as well.
Right.
And there's always like the two evil brothers. It's like Osiris and Seth, Abel and Cain, right? Or there's always like these
These
arguments.
opposites and
Like,
these things. So it is, going back to the yin and yang, they have a deeper sense built in of holding that.
mm-hmm.
Martial artists know you hold these opposites
Like you
so
hold
that you
space
don't
for
overreact,
it.
right?
Going.
So one of the problems, going back to some of the earlier conversations on not turning away into spiritual light and ignoring what's going on, is that our greater growth enables us to hold these opposites with a sense of greater spirituality and bringing it into. But if we turn in fear, one of the problems with the new agey kind of thinkings,
Mhm.
the power of positive thinking influence, is that not only did it move away from the deeper esoteric understandings, but it made everybody just want all goodness and light, and I will have this and that and blah blah blah. If I am nothing but kind, I will have favors, more prosperity, more, you name it, if I believe. And so it hasn't been an ideology that has really enabled us to move deeper into who we really are.
I agree with you 100% because I think that's why everybody on YouTube is lost. I mean, all the spiritual channels I watch, I'm like, not really about manifestation and positive thinking, because first of all, we shouldn't just be manifesting whatever we want. We should be in alignment with the will of our inner self, right? And so
Right.
people think if I'm positive, then I can manifest things and good things will come to me. But then we see people have mental breakdowns, have psychotic breakdowns, or they do hallucinogens and then they never come back from it. Like there's a lot of good things in this stuff we could say, but there's also been a lot of problems with it. And we can't just be like a free for all spirituality, Disneyland kind of thing. Spirituality is serious business. And I know
Yeah.
to me, when I went into the underworld, I became a whole different woman. Like I literally was dead. I felt like I was dead
Mhm.
for years,
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's such an important part because I think now I have a more solid foundation, whereas before a lot of things could have just taken me out, but now I have that like foundation of the underworld to stand
Right.
on.
Right. And that's where true birth occurs. It's like that's where the rebirth, people talk about a rebirth, that's where it occurs.
The rebirth, like
Yeah, and coming from the underworld.
oh, I love that. I love. And do you think
And
a lot of people are going through the underworld journey right now with kind of what's happening in the world, or do you think it's more
I
the
think, it's a good interesting question because sometimes I've thought, is humanity going into its own underworld experience? But the problem is we must become aware in the middle of that.
exactly?
I think awareness is the ultimate component of
Mhm.
spirituality.
Totally. Like knowing what's
Consciousness.
happening when it's happening, right? Like, oh, I must
Right,
go through
right.
a shadow period, or I'm not, that kind of stuff is so important.
Yeah. So I'm not sure that a lot of people are there.
Yeah, yeah. I
But I have played with the idea of, is this it? Are we going into a human experience of the underworld?
Mhm.
You know,
I
it's
do
a
see
good
like
question.
amongst the leaders, like the archetypes of different figures, like the famous people in the world. I'm like, oh, that kind of feels like Ares's energy, or that feels like this one, you like there's certain people that are just all for war. And I'm like, oh, that's Ares's energy. Or then you sense kind of like Persephone's energy with all the Me Too movement. You saw like the goddess of the underworld go, enough is enough, and just brought, and then the child sex trafficking stuff, like all this evil kind of coming out.
Yeah. There
Ooh,
is so much we need to work with, and we can't turn away from it. You know, those of us that are spiritual, we need to hold it and
exactly.
hold the vision of greater light and greater being, and
Mhm.
that all this has to come into its own transformation.
Absolutely. And didn't like Dr. Hawkins say that like every one person that's super stable, their aura affects so many people, but that
Yes.
stability takes a long time, right? Like it's not just like a little bit, like, but so like if it's like 100 million, I think I was talking to somebody and he said there might be around 300,000, 300 million light workers, star seed, those kind of things on the planet right now. So imagine if all of them had this proper training of the shadow work, the underwork, and they were like solid.
That's
Oh,
right. That they
that
weren't trying to turn away and just like I get so fed up with Facebook, to tell you the truth, where I see everybody posting pictures of flowers and all this kind of stuff, which is great.
is
And I look
both
at every
sides.
flower, it moves my heart. And I post something that's really serious, not one like, not
Oh,
one comment. And
yes.
I'm talking about vitally serious stuff. I think it was it they're afraid to put anything
I
out
think
in the public of what they may believe. Possibly that's it. Or are they stuck in the I will only comment on light and therefore light will exist and the darkness won't? No, it's not going to work that way,
it's not
folks.
gonna work because it's same thing. Like when I talk about demons with people, like I'm like, there's a demon, we got to remove it or something like that. Oh my God, you're talking about demon. Like, well, they exist. They're all around us. We might as
That's
well
right,
like,
right.
deal with
Yeah,
it.
there's a really powerful book that didn't get a lot of attention back in the 70s or so. And most of us may have heard, some of us that are older, The Road Less Traveled.
Mhm.
And
Scott
I can't, yes, M. Scott Peck, that's right. And then he did another one, The People of the Lie, and
Ooh.
it was on human evil. And
Oh,
it was intense.
yeah.
Very few people read that book. They loved The Road Less Traveled,
Yes.
but they did not read The People of the Lie.
Yeah, people are very like scared of like the darkness and the devil and things like that. It seems like even there's a book called Interview with the Devil, like written like in the 1920s, and it was just like released like 6 years ago or something.
Uh,
And it's like the devil's talking like this is how I do this is how I do. And I read it and I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Because I always tell people you can't know God until you know the darkness. Like, because
that's
otherwise you're just going to be confusing the two all the time, right?
right,
Right.
right.
People are scared of it. They're like, oh, like that word. I'm like, well, it's gonna get you more if you don't you don't
Because
know that.
the shadow projections that
Exactly.
emerge as a result.
Exactly. They start seeing it
We
in
don't hold the shadow within ourselves and our culture.
Mhm.
We project it on others and we continue what's occurring.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like we are all capable of accessing that darkness within us. And then some people do shadow work and they maintain their darkness. They kind of tame that inner animal, right? And it becomes their friend. And then versus you ignore it and then you just see it in others constantly. And that's why there's so many channels on YouTube, people talking about psychopaths and narcissists for years. And I'm just
Mhm.
like, but we have to go past it. Like also what
Yeah, right,
one within you that attracted that narcissist, you know?
right,
So
right.
it's important.
Not being in a sense fascinated by it, but knowing. Right.
There's so many books and channels on it. And it kind of hurts my heart because I know everybody wants to get better, but then there's so much misinformation online.
Right,
So they're going
right,
into these
right,
pits. We're lucky because I got to go to the school that you were teaching at, which was a very scientific, psychological, and spiritual, everything together. We had physics
right.
PhDs, so we got a very strong understanding. And so, yeah, and you were saying you have a lot more students in the classes.
Right. My eco psychology class has the biggest class I've ever had at CIHS. And we're dealing with important issues. We're talking about nature. We're talking about our psychological and spiritual connection with Mother Earth and going into many different how'd you put it? Well, we've been talking about the major problems right now and why it's so important.
Yes, yes.
Connection with our environment and the idea that we are all connected. And next week, we're going to go into plants and the fact that they've discovered in some University of Australia, one of their universities, they've been doing work showing that trees communicate.
Oh, I love that. Yes, absolutely.
Right, and look at our relationship with plants, and
Mhm.
not psychedelic plants, that'll be a future week, but right now, just herbal plants and healing plants, and the fact that trees talk. And then we're gonna have an experience almost like a cooking class where we're going to make a herbal tincture. They are supposed to, by next Wednesday, I've mentioned a few herbs that have and what their healing components are for them to research, and to also buy a bottle of vodka, because you'll need a small bottle of vodka to put on top of all the herbs. And then we'll let it set for 4 weeks, and then we'll come back and strain it, and you've got the tincture.
I love that. Imagine if all the kids learned that, like at school,
Right,
you
right.
have just
It's
like,
like a kids cooking class we're having in the eco psych class. I've never done that before, but I thought it was really great, you know?
I love that idea because you
Yeah.
always you remember these experiential things in school. Like I remember them. Like, oh, we did this. I
Yeah.
always remember that I took a class with you with like aging, and I loved what you taught us
Uh,
that people as they get older, they report having greater sexual satisfaction. That always sticks to me, that people know themselves more, and as they get older, their sexuality gets better. And I always tell my clients, I'm like, sex just gets better as you get older, and we
mhm.
just grow and we become better. And I love that you taught us that positive view because in the modern world everybody's so afraid of, oh, this is going to change, this is going to change. I'm like, yeah, but every decade we have a new jewel that opens up within us.
Right, right. And I'm 81,
Oh,
81 and a half.
yes.
And I haven't slowed down in my life at all. I am, very productive. So I don't let age give me some message that I cannot be doing the things in life that I might have done when I'm 40. I'm doing more now than I might have done when I was 40, and I'm doing more now probably than the average 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old.
Yes, I love that about you. Like your brain has just gotten stronger over the years because you've always used it in like a spiritual and intellectual way. You have that balance. It's not like one of them
Right.
overdeveloped, I think, right?
And that's one of the things that I think was the more significant message that I gave in that adult and aging class, which was use it or lose it.
Mm-hmm.
They began with that statement regarding sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
that older life and sexuality had a lot to depend on younger and middle age. Well, so with our cognitive abilities and the attention we give to life, it's all the same thing, use it or lose it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because like it's kind of like almost like our brain forgets certain things, right? And then if we reread it again, we're kind of opening up those neural pathways. And I love that you dance and you've always danced. And I think like for women, that's so important because it connects them to their inner feminine. Because the goddess, she's always
Yeah.
dancing. Even in Hinduism, Shiva and Shakti are dancing, right? And
Right. It's interesting you bring that up about dancing, because last night's dream,
oh,
there's a portion toward as I'm waking. I might call it this morning's dream because I got up about 6:45, and I'd been dreaming. And what part of the dream, it had a whole thing about I was going to be leading some things, and they were spiritual practices and whatever. And there was some shadow element in it too, of some woman that was a roommate, and so there was that kind of stuff, that there was some differences between us. And then I was dancing on a large floor, dancing with the freedom that one would have as those ice skaters that do those beautiful
like this spins.
that was right, and moving all over the place. And I was doing this in the dream without ice skating shoes, or whatever you would even call them.
I love that.
Wow, that was really great.
Because in
So,
Sufism, they do that a lot, right? Like the circles that they
well, the whole dervish turning, I've only had a tiny bit of training in that, 2 5-day trainings, so not enough that I really could ever get into it. It's a very big dedication.
Mhm,
There's a lot of major discipline and training in that. You're
mhm.
learning to turn around your own heart,
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
and a connection with the heart of the universe at the same time.
Oh, wow. Oh, I had no idea. That's so
Oh
cool.
yeah, it's major, major training.
Well, and I have a question. So I read somewhere that like Sufism and Sophia it's almost like Sufism is connected to the more feminine aspect of Islam, or do you think that's a false, or what do you feel on that
No,
one?
I would say most of the traditions, Taoism recognizes at the heart that the feminine is most important. If we go to ancient Judaism, there's a thing in the Haggadah, which I love,
Mhm.
which is the birth of Adam, matter, was only possible because God breathed her into him. So, feminine spirit, bringing life. Okay, that's in the ancient Haggadah. So it's in Judaism, the whole Shekinah kind of thing.
Mhm.
Okay, and you can go on and on. I mean, it was the three Marys that were the ones that discovered the that were there at the cross. And
Mhm.
then it was Mary Magdalene that was there at the resurrected Christ.
Mary Magdalene, Mother Mary, and what was the other Mary?
Another Mary, another
I don't,
Mary.
oh, okay, there's three of them. Oh, okay.
Right, right. They were at the crucifixion. And I'm pretty sure I could be wrong on that. I know Mary Magdalene and the mother of Jesus was, but I think there was a third Mary too.
You're right. Yes, yes.
And but Mary Magdalene is so significant, and the Gospel of Mary is really worth reading. The Book of Mary, you can read it for free online. You
Gospel
just
of Mary.
for the actual translation from the Gnostic tradition. And recently, I have it written down that I remember another Gnostic book, which is called The Gospel of the Beloved Companion, referring to Mary Magdalene, and those are ancient.
Wow. She's such a significant thing because when Jesus passed, right, like when she was supposed to take over the church, is what I've heard. Like she was supposed to be taking over,
Right,
and they kind of exiled her basically. And then they took over the church, they changed all the books, they took out a bunch of things they didn't like, you know, and then
right. That occurred in 300 AD. There was just a major shift. Christianity, as it presents itself today, has nothing to do whatsoever with Yeshua or Jesus.
absolutely.
Yeah,
He was like he's a loving, peaceful, but very powerful warrior, obviously, and how they make him out to be, and in the Bible, I'm like, God would never say that. God would
right,
never do
right,
that, you know.
right.
So yeah,
Yeah,
but evil is kind of embedded religion to kind of divide people, right? So it's kind of like, well, we're
mhm,
this, and Muslims this, Jewish people this, Christians this, Hindu. But Hindu, actually, true Hindus that I've met, they all say they're monotheistic. They say those are all aspects of the same God. They do believe in one God. So although they do appear polytheistic, most of them read the Gita, and Krishna is supposed to be God, and Shiva even worships Krishna, right? So there's a lot
right.
of misunderstanding, like, oh, they're just worshiping idols. It's like, well, no, they're praying to God, and God is blessing
That's
that.
right. There are archetypes.
Exactly.
Just as when we use a mantra, it's an archetype. And
Yeah.
those are very important energies. Again, that's what Jung was pointing out.
About the archetypes and
These archetypal presences that are part of, in Sufism and Kabbalah, particularly at the Western civilization, there's this whole thing of alchemy.
Mhm.
It's also in Taoism and in the deeper some Vedic teachings. Okay, so the alchemy is the blending of certain elements in
Mhm.
order, or the taking out of certain elements to come to the core element, which
Yes.
was used, and they were all metaphors for coming to the great self within.
Yes, like the golden body
Right.
of Buddha,
And
sort
the
of, right?
divine presence,
Alchemizing
right,
everything inside.
right.
And
So
trauma.
all of those archetypes are about that journey.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like we see different archetypes at different part of our alchemical journey.
Right,
Oh, wow.
right. What
Yes.
is it bringing to us, What is this mantra I'm practicing? What energy, what archetypal energy am I bringing in? And then when we have a teacher or we are familiar with many of the mantras within a different tradition, then
Yeah.
we bring in another archetype according to what's needed. Those mantras are resonated within our being.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And the archetypes are ancient, like they're symbols that have always existed, and that's why we all connect to them, right?
Right, right, right.
Yes, I love that. Yeah,
I think I'd like to say that this is kind of where we've covered so many different roads. This
Mhm,
is the whole place to bring it to.
mhm,
This whole alchemical journey
mhm,
that is about discovering the true self within, which is the divine self.
mhm.
And that everything we do is to come to that place. But we are deluded and drawn away from it, whether it's by fundamentalist religion, fundamentalist neuroscience, living in the world and being caught up with all the wars and the responses to them, and that the only real answer is this inner work and the outer work of joining together.
I love that. Oof, wow, so well said. The inner work ourselves and then the outer work of joining together. And so I was thinking like, there's different categories of the earth that have to be improved, right? Like the education system, the home structures, almost like if all the light workers did what they're good at and kind of like, hey, let's all gather and we work on this. And then instead of like everybody trying to do everything, it's like some of us are really good at this, so we should focus on that. No leader, all is equal, kind of like the King Arthur thing. I love that, And
Round table, right,
exactly. I love
right.
it. And there was a guy that I interviewed and he's a galactic astrologer and he was saying like these different and he's a blueprint for like building the new earth model. And so I do think like we're gonna do it. I think it's gonna be a hard journey for the next 3 to 5 to 10 years for all of us. But like my hope and like my guidance says like we're gonna make it. It's just gonna be kind of like giving birth to like a very big baby or something like that. You know what I mean?
Allowing that we do what's needed.
Have to do what's needed, which is a
Have
lot
to
of
do what's
work.
needed,
Yeah.
right,
But the indigenous people owned all of the lands, right? So the land technically belongs to the people, So
right.
we're
Right.
allowed to do with the earth what we want. But yeah, the winning
Yeah.
against evil should be an interesting one. So do you feel that there's like demonic forces that are kind of behind the leaders of our world? Or do you feel like it's more like ETs, or do you think it's a consciousness? Like what
I
do you
think
feel like
that's
it is?
a whole nother topic that be saved for another conversation, because
Okay.
that could go in a whole nother direction, and there could be a lot said about that.
Okay, perfect. So maybe another time you could come and you could share
Yes,
that if you
yes,
when you have
yes.
time between all the
Because I
work.
think so much has been covered in this one, and it's best to just digest that.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. Is there anything else that you feel guided to share, kind of like towards the end? Anything coming up for you that you want to leave with the light workers that see this?
No, but I would like to tell people that if they want to, they can go to my website,
Yes.
psychospiritual.org,
Hmm.
and they can sign up for a newsletter.
Hmm.
It's at the bottom of the home page to sign up for that newsletter.
Yes.
And you can, that way you can get the one that was the February, March edition, because I'm not sure that it sends out automatically the one before that,
Mhm.
because I'll soon be doing the May, April one, and they are part of this discussion.
Oh, perfect. Okay, perfect. I'll put that.
Okay, so I do recommend that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm
Okay,
definitely gonna
it's
put
really
that.
been a pleasure. It's
It's
just, we've covered a lot of ground.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom. You've done so much work and you're such a gem for our world. So thank you for so many years of service to
Yeah.
humanity. And I love you so much. And
Okay.
I'll talk to you soon.